Hey guys, it's me again. Thanks for stopping by. I saw another thing or a string of things that I might do a small series on, and as of late, I feel kind of compelled to um, kind of do these videos as a form of sharing and maybe as kind of a at a minimum shared experience could be hopefully helpful to those out there that would like to listen. But I absolutely love doing open discussions, and I'm not against that idea. And you know I digress. The second thing that I had been seeing quite a bit, and while I'm no authority in the matter, I just figured I'd not put 2 cents, but just kind of show where I try my best to do. And that's the idea of, when we run into situations where we're in disagreements with some of our friends and family, or if we're just on completely opposing sides. And depending on the situation, um, I always, think of that traditional phrase, the glass half full versus half empty. One of the first things that I do my best to do is I always try and come to that starting point that regardless it's a cup of water, you know? And I think what I can kind of get a kick out of is sometimes when you're having, whether it's a heated discussion or borderline a debate or sometimes an argument, if we can't agree that it's a cup of water, then you may not ever find kind of a point of compromise. Because if you can't start on that baseline, whatever the subject may be, and there are many that people can disagree, but if you can't get to that point that, oh no, it's definitely a cup of water, and you can tell depending on the subject matter, people will be, no, 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 it's half empty, or oh no, no, of course not, it's half full. They're just passionate, but you can get right out of the gate that it's like, oh yeah, it is just a cup of water, and it's like, oh well, then we can move forward on if we're going to measure or if we're going to compare notes, and maybe you could potentially, if the intention was to sway a person one way or the other, that starting point, you can address the human level, you can address that point and be able to grow from there. And then what's unfortunate is if that person denies already out the gate, no, 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 it's definitely a half full cup of water, then you might just have to early out of the gate agree to disagree and move on, or avoid that subject with that person, because it's not, there are certain things that, especially if people are very passionate about certain topics, you're not going to sway that person. You're not going to change their mind, or it would be very hard to change their mind. And so I think if you take that an extra step further, and this was more popular a few years ago, and we do see this from time to time, depending on the subject matter, there are people who choose to invest their time in protest. And I think peaceful protests are completely fine. I think that, if there is something that, you would like to see a solution be provided for, then it's absolutely valuable to voice your opinion. Where I think it gets kind of tricky, though, and this is, again, all of these are just my opinion. And again, I hope that there's something that you can take from it, should you choose. But if I was standing in line for whatever thing, and I'm grouped up with people and we are protesting a particular thing, my mind automatically will want to push for finding if there's an available solution. Now, I know with some subjects, there's not an obvious solution, and the point of the protest is to shed light on that particular thing. But if there's a decent amount of light already shed on it, then what can we bring to the table, or can we all get together and kind of brainstorm what opportunities and solutions are there that may not be 100% what we're looking for, but maybe are at least a step in progress, or a step towards a direction that would be more favorable. Because the other thing that kind of comes along with this particular subject is a step in your direction. There is someone probably out there that they view that as a step away from the direction they would like to go. And I'm sure you've all heard the idea that you're not going to make everybody happy. And whether that's in a movie or a show that you're a fan of, and they make a change, and it's like, why did they make that change? It's because they're trying to listen and make something more approachable, but they're doing it in a way that, alienates some of the people that may have been their original fans. And so it's kind of funny when that, not funny comedically, but it's kind of funny when that happens, because their heart was in the right place. They're trying to make whatever thing approachable to the most amount of people. But in doing that, they may make changes to stuff that, uh, you know, really upset the fans that were the ones that brought them there. A quick example that comes to my mind, and I've gotten in many arguments with a good friend of mine, is Star Wars The Last Jedi. And if you know, then you know. But if you took off your Star Wars hat completely and you watched the movie, it's not that bad. I see the potential vision. I see what someone was going for, whether that's Rian Johnson or the director, uh, or someone else on that team. The problem was, for this specific example, is he chose to do that in a very popular franchise that people wanted to see certain things. They had expectation. And where it gets so funny, using just this as like a metaphor for whatever other situation you'd like to sub it in for, if it works, is a fan of Star Wars. I think most of the ones I think of cannot stand that movie, and by definition then the sequel trilogy. And what's fascinating to me is I vividly remember the trailers and the excitement that was brewing at that time, that there was definitely interest when those movies were coming out and people were discussing them. But when they saw that experience and some of their expectations were subverted, very, I think that's probably the best way to describe it for this example. It was extreme subversion of expectation. Those original Star Wars fans, they got out of Dodge before the next one could even come out. In fact, there was even discussion of completely purging it. And, again, for this particular metaphor, for those who don't watch Star Wars or may have skipped out on this, I'm sure this may not land. But the idea was that if that wasn't called Star Wars, and if it wasn't any of the Star Wars characters, and there was a new name, whatever it's called, I think it would have been pretty well received. There was some quality there. The problem is I think in the pursuit of the success of making this really good movie, they tied that story to Star Wars, which then led them to alienate their fan base, and there's further things to discuss. And so using that as an outlet, and kind of a funny example, like what's the solution? Well, the solution in that case was people stopped, enjoying, at least for that time, that medium. Now it seems like they're going, a better direction. But kind of coming back to my original thesis statement of like the glass half full, glass half empty, it was so funny when I would try and explain this to people. They would not drop the idea, well, it is Star Wars, so therefore you can agree it's crap. And it's like, well, no, it's certainly not the best, but it's not, an F. A C is still passing. And again, if we change this metaphor and we go back to the original idea of the glass half full, glass half empty, cup of water, it was a movie, it was entertaining, and I think the Star Wars hat is where that shift kind of happened. And so if we adjust this while people are talking, whether it's politics or anything out in the world right now, there's a human element and those original baselines that I think people are very quick to skip over. And that's something that I would like to share as a starting point for everybody to just say, okay, and again, I'm not going to get into any of those subjects, because the purpose of me sharing this is to just try and encourage people to find those common grounds. Find, if the fight's glass half full versus half empty, it's a cup of water. And if you find that, whatever the debate may be, I used a funny one with Star Wars. There are many, many, many others out there that I don't mind going into. If this is another one that catches people's attention, we can certainly discuss it. But, I think the biggest two things for me is always get back to your baseline or the human element. And it's just like, hey, this person's feelings was hurt. Oh, dang, that wasn't my intention. Dang, I'm so sorry. Or hey, these people are affected by these decisions. Okay, are there, and to always have that baseline before we move to the big headlines of us versus them, or villainizing someone who sees it a different way, because at the end of the day we all are human, and we can't forget that. And if that comes off silly or preachy or any of that, that's not quite my intention. But again, I'm seeing some discourse on many different subject matters, and I was trying to approach it through hopefully a funny lens, but maybe this one's not as organized as I'd like. And so again, if you think of anything, please put it in the comments, and hope all is well your way. Take care.